Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. I'm here today to talk about my paintings. My name is Koya and I live in Boston. I was born and raised in Mumbai and my parents are from Calicut. I've always been passionate about art. I've always painted and always encouraged my friends to paint with me when I was little. That's what we did when we had spare time in our hands. I think part of this passion comes from my dad. Not that he um, liked to paint, but he loved art, and he used to take me as a kid to different art galleries in Mumbai, and exposed me to different artists, different styles of paintings, different mediums, and I think that kind of got me into this interest in art. And I always came back home, wanting to paint. So my background is fashion design. I worked as a fashion designer for many years, and then I moved to the U.S. and went to the School of Visual Arts in New York and did courses in graphic design and typography, and worked as a graphic designer for many years. And then many years later, I had kids and decided that I wanted to do something where I could stay home with them during their spring and summer breaks and work when they were in school. So I decided to do a teacher's training course and worked as a teacher for many years. Now my kids are a little older, and I have some more spare time in our daily lives, to daily busy lives, to paint. So I am pursuing this passion a little more. I primarily do two mediums. One is oil painting and the other is watercolor. I'll talk about both of these mediums. Oil painting is something I did for a longer period of time. Watercolor is something that is newer to me. So let's talk about oil painting first. So in oil painting, you have your canvas, you have your brushes, you have your pigments, and then you need to have a thinner to thin these pigments and to carry it onto the canvas. The thinner can be linseed oil or saff oil or walnut oil or a mineral spirit like turbinoid. Um, because oil painting and it's oil based, oil takes forever to evaporate because it's dense. So that's one thing that you have to think about. Your paintings are going to take a lot longer to dry, and you need to be a little more patient with that. So that's one of the drawbacks in oil painting. Cleaning up is a little longer because your brushes needs to be cleaned every time you finish painting. So every time, if you've had an hour to paint and you want to come back to your painting tomorrow, you need to clean your brushes, because your brushes will ruin if you keep it like that, and come to it the next day. So each day you do painting, you need to clean them up thoroughly. So that process takes 15 to 20 minutes, and so that's something that you need to calculate when you think you're going to paint. But having said about the drawbacks, the fun thing is that or the best part is that if you make a mistake, it's a very forgiving medium. You can correct your mistakes easily. I generally don't sketch when I paint in oil paints, and I just go directly with the paints. The colors also in oil painting are very vivid, which I love. It has a fantastic sheen. So these are the things I love about oil painting. And like I said, I have done paintings where I have painted like 4 or 5 years ago and just decided that I don't like this painting anymore, and I don't like the colors or whatever it is. I'll go back and I can either correct it, or I can paint all over and make it into a brand new painting. So those are the things I love about oil painting, and I don't have to plan much. I just have to, decide what I want to paint and start painting. Now let's talk about watercolor. Watercolor is a newer medium for me. I've just started doing it like a couple of years ago. So I'm learning as I go. And so in watercolor, you have your watercolor paper, you have your pigments, and then you need water to thin down those pigments to carry it on to the paper. There are many kinds of papers that you get in the market that works for watercolor. There are different weights of paper as well. In watercolor, what I enjoy the most is that you have different kinds of washes that you learn in watercolor. You have wet on wet, you have dry on dry, although dry on dry is not really a wash. But these are like all these techniques that you learn. You can also use different tools to enhance your painting. Like, for example, you can use salt onto a wet surface, and the salt and the pigments and the water, they react, and the salt disperses and gives a beautiful effect. So so there are a lot of these kinds of surprises that you can do in watercolor, that you can't do in oil. But there's a lot of planning required in watercolor, unlike oil painting. So the planning is that there is no white pigment in watercolor, so you have to plan out. If you're painting something, you've sketched it out, and you now need to start painting, but you need to know where your whites are, and because there are no white pigment in watercolor, you have to preserve those whites, and the white is the white of the paper. So you have to remember to preserve those whites. And if you're anything like me who's forgetful, I get carried away and I'll paint right over the white areas that needs to be preserved. So there are other tools that can help you. Like you can use a masking fluid on those white areas. So the masking fluid is something I use often. So you sketch out a painting, you put your masking fluid on the white areas that needs to be preserved, let it dry, and then paint over, and then remove the masking fluid, and you have preserved your whites. So these are the things that you have to remember, and you have to plan out in your painting. And the consistency of the water to the pigment also plays an important part in watercolor. So you can have like a creamy consistency where the pigment and the water is thick. So there's more pigment, less water. So that gives a creamy consistency. You have a tea-like consistency where it is more water, more diluted, basically. So these gives these give different effects on your painting, and the color also differs, because if it's diluted, it will have a lighter color. If it's more rich in color, you'll have if you have more pigments, you'll have a richer color. So those are the things in watercolor that you have to keep in mind when you paint. It dries very quickly, unlike oil painting. So that's a good thing. It's good and bad. Good because you're done with the painting in one sitting. And if you want to, if you're pressed for time, you can use a hair dryer and dry it further. So that the drying process is even shorter. But if you make a mistake, it's so hard to correct in watercolor. So it's a tougher medium that way, at least for me. My inspirations come from different places. They are usually from my own personal photographs that my friends have taken, or photographs I've seen online, and sometimes it's a still life. Sometimes it's a photograph I've seen in a catalog or magazine. In fact, one of the paintings that was showcased in an art gallery, this was before COVID, is that inspiration came from a photograph that I had seen in a rug catalog, and I loved the colors in the rug, and I decided to paint something using those colors. So yeah, it can be from anything, so anything you fancy. And once you decide on what you want to paint, you take two photocopies of for your reference. So one is the colored version, and the other would be the black and white version. So the colored version is, of course, the colored reference. You know where those colors you want to put, and the black and white version is actually a very important part of your reference because it gives you a good tonal indication, a tonal value indication for your painting. And the tonal values are your midtones, your shadows, and your highlights. And over the years, I've learned that if you get these tonal values right, your painting is going to look spot on. And if you don't, it's going to look off. So there's something I've learned, and I try to achieve in all my paintings to make it look as real as possible. So in this video, I am going to put a small time lapse of a painting from the beginning to end, so you can take a look at it. And I've also put a snippet of a few of my artwork, a few of my watercolors, and my oil paintings. And there's more online on social media. On Facebook, it's Art by Shamin Koya, and Instagram as well, Art by Shamin Koya. So do take a look at more of my work there. I would encourage everybody to paint, do something creative. I don't think you need any special talent. All you need is a few supplies, an intention to paint, and the best part is, you kind of forget the rest of the world, and you're, that's what I do. I come down here in my studio in my basement. I put on some music, and I'm in my zone, and I find it very stress relieving. And like I said, you don't need any talent. It's all practice, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. So do paint, and I also want to take this opportunity to thank Sheba. So thank you, Sheba, for encouraging me to make this video. And like I said, please try and do one painting a week, or a painting a month, and then you'll see that you're enjoying it, and it's the process that is more important than the product. So enjoy the process, and do something creative. Hi everyone, so I'm ready to do the time lapse, but before I do the time lapse, I just want to show you what I have with me. I have my apron, because your clothes will definitely get spoiled with oil paint. So I have a set of clothes that I keep only for oil paint when I paint, so definitely wear your clothes that you're not going to wear anywhere else but when you paint. And especially with oil, it's not the same with watercolor. And an apron for extra protection. And this is the turpenoid I use. I know there's a glare, but yeah, there's a turpenoid. And generally when we use a turpenoid, we use it in a container like this, so you can see there's turpenoid in it. And I have two containers which are together. So one container I would use to dip the brush and the pigment, and the other container I would use to clean my brush as I go. I have my brushes, and I have my paints in a palette. I can show you that in a minute. So these are my paints. You can see it. Okay, so yeah, so I'm ready to paint. I generally do not sketch when I do an oil painting. I go directly on the canvas without any sketches. I take the paint and the brush and go directly, because like I said earlier, it's a very forgiving medium. So if you make a mistake, it's not a problem. You can always correct it. So I generally go directly on the canvas. And of course I have my canvas ready, 11 by 14 inches. And I'm ready now. Okay, hope you enjoy it. and this is the finished painting.